Hello, and welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. The topic of today's Todd Talk is going to be underachievement amongst gifted students. So, why is underachievement a problem? So, first off, anywhere from 10 to 50% of gifted students suffer from underachievement. I know this is a big gap, but one of the biggest problems with underachievement is it's not necessarily easy to identify. There are some kids, obviously, who are underachievers. There are other kids that are a little more sneaky or a little more um, covert about their underachievement. So you may think they're doing their best, you may think they're trying their hardest, or you may think that they're achieving where they need to be, but in actuality, they are not. So the number varies for that very reason. There's not any one test you can give to test for underachievement. You have to look for various signs, which we'll talk about. So 25% of females are considered underachievers, while 50% of males. So it's much more prevalent amongst males, much more prevalent in older students. And then the surprising statistic is that 18 to 25% of students who drop out of high school have been identified as gifted in one area or another. So that means that students who have the potential to think at high levels and to achieve at high levels are actually not even able to meet the bare minimum requirements of high school. So underachievement can be a long-term problem, which is why it needs to be solved while we have these students in our classes. Because there was a study of Baltimore, Maryland public schools, and in this study, they found that they divided kids into two categories: gifted who were high achievers and gifted who were underachievers. And out of the high-achieving students, 100% of those students went on to a four-year college. While for the underachievers, it was 87%, which isn't bad. That's still a pretty good statistic. But it starts to get worse because getting into college is not the problem. It's staying in college that can be the issue. So out of the high-achieving gifted kids, 83% of them graduated from a four-year college. So they went to school, they stuck it out, and they graduated with a degree. Out of the underachieving gifted students, only 47% did not graduate. So nearly half of them were not completing their 4 years. And part of the problem is bad habits learned when they were in middle school and high school carry over into college. And then it's hard to break these habits, or it's hard to get out of them. And so, it just becomes a spiral. And they have found this even extends. And so they follow these same kids. And they found that even later in life, this habit of underachievement really kind of hindered them. So 13 years after they graduated from high school, they found that this group of underachieving gifted kids tended to not have as stable a career as those who were in the other high achieving group. And then marriages didn't seem to last as long as the high achievers did. So these are successes in life, and this underachievement is holding these students back from being successful in life. So it's not just a school problem; it can carry over. So they still displayed a lot of characteristics that they did when they were in school, such as a low perception of their abilities, a lack of persistence, so they don't have the grit, and they don't take responsibility for their actions. They blame others for things that go wrong for them rather than taking responsibility and seeking to change that. So we probably have to define what underachievement is. And so underachievement is very elusive. So I'm going to do my best to try to tell you generally what underachievement is. So basically, it's discrepancy between potential and achievement. So if a student is gifted in math and they're getting a C in a math class, then most likely it is not their potential that is causing them to get that C. It could be they're not turning in their homework, they're not studying, they're blowing off assignments, all sorts of things that have nothing to do with their ability to perform math. There's also the predicted achievement to actual achievement. So if a student starts out as gifted, in a lot of states it's once gifted, always gifted. So a student starts out gifted in reading when they're in second grade, but when they're in high school, they're barely reading, or they're having difficulty with their language arts class, then they did not carry on with their predicted achievements. And then lastly is just their failure in general to develop their potential. So, like I said, there aren't tests for this, but you can have a conversation with a kid and find out in 5 minutes that they have high potential. but they may not be reaching that potential. So, as teachers, we have to be diligent about in the classroom looking for these signs of underachievement. So, I'm going to talk about 10 different causes of underachievement that you can look for in your classroom. So, the first of these, and so there are various signs that you can look for, general signs. One is they take easier classes to avoid work. So this is the kid who avoids the AP class because they just find it easier to take the non-AP class, or they avoid the honors because they don't want to be challenged. It could be that they're avoiding competitive activities, even things that aren't academic, like trying out for the school band or the school play, or trying out for sport, because they're used to having success and they don't want to have failure. So the easiest way to avoid failure is not to try something that's really difficult. So in addition to that, they procrastinate to the last minute. So these are the students that, literally wait to the 11th hour to try to complete their assignment and turn it in. And it's never as good as it could have been had they, taken their time and really developed it. But a lot of those kids still are able to pull off good grades because of their ability. They take pride in getting A's, even kind of skirting the game of school. So they don't actually follow the rules, but they still get good grades. They give minimal responses to assignments, so they're just lack of effort. And it's interesting. Some students are underachievers in certain areas. So they might have someone who's an underachiever just in science class, or just maybe because they don't like that social studies teacher, they're going to underachieve. So sometimes the underachievement is not consistent. It depends on the subject area, or the way the teaching is, or the teacher's personality. So there are 10 general causes of underachievement. So the first one is boredom. So what this looks like is a student is not being challenged. So as a result, they shut down. And so it can be caused by a couple things. So gifted kids tend to move at a quicker pace. So if they're in a regular ed classroom and it's going kind of slow because there are kids that have to catch up, that can be really difficult for a gifted kid to have to sit there and wait for others to catch up. A second cause is social emotional needs. So this could be anything from having a low frustration tolerance. Some gifted kids do not tolerate, fools gladly. So they don't put up with kids who aren't at their ability. They don't want to work with them. Sometimes there's a lack of impulse control. So they want to show off how smart they are, and as a result, they'll blurt out answers or be a know-it-all or be cocky as a result. Third cause is peers. So these are their fellow classmates. So, and part of the problem is that for some gifted kids, it's difficult to find peer mates. So in the United States, for better or for worse, all kids start at the age of 6 in kindergarten, and then they progress through the grades with grade level with kids who are the same ages of them. However, we all know that when those kids start in kindergarten, that they're varying abilities. And so when you start a kid in kindergarten who can barely read, opposed to a kid who's reading at a 3rd grade level, that's a big gap. And so it's hard to identify necessarily with those age mates. It's hard to find a peer. They may get made fun of by their friends for doing well. This is especially prevalent amongst young Black and Hispanic boys, where they act dumb because they don't want to get made fun of. A fourth cause could be the home life, which is not something you as a teacher can really do anything about, but you can still look for the signs. This could be that the parents don't value education, or they're the other end of the spectrum where they care so much about it that they have too high an expectation. They're putting unreal expectations on their students. And it could just be home dynamics. Have a student who has 7 brothers and sisters, and they're the oldest. The chances of them getting attention from their parents to help with homework is going to be very little because the parents are trying to take care of the other kids. It's no fault of the parents. It just is what it is, and so that can be a cause. The fifth cause is kids who are twice exceptional, or 2E, and this could be a kid with a learning disability. They could have attention deficit disorder. They could have hyperactivity, and so what happens is the disability impedes their ability to reach their potential. And sometimes they can mask one another. So a kid gets kind of stuck in limbo, where a kid who's gifted doesn't test as special as being a special ed student because of their ability to think at a high level. And their special ed prevents them from being identified as gifted. So they're just kind of stuck in this middle. Another thing you should look for as a cause of underachievement is lack of intrinsic motivation. So these are kids who, are not willing to play the game of school. So in school, we have these carrots, which are grades, which we dangle in front of kids. And for some kids, that's very motivating, or could be a reward, or a gold star, or stickers, or whatever. There are other kids that are not enticed by that. And so that's not going to motivate them. They have to care. I mean, I see this more and more and more, where kids really have to care about what they're learning about in order to be willing to give you any sort of effort. And so they just don't do it for the sake of doing it. They do it because they want to do it. Seventh cause is lack of skills. So a lot of times, answers have come easy to gifted kids especially in their early grades, where they were a little ahead of everyone else. But eventually, what will happen is kids catch up, and the other kids who have caught up had skills that they developed, such as study skills or note-taking skills, or skills that are going to help them to achieve. The gifted kids, on the other hand, may lack those. And one problem is that teachers may already assume by the time they get to a certain grade level that they have those. And there's also, of course, the fundamental problem that in most of our classrooms, we tend to focus on memorization and not 21st century skills. So we're not teaching skills, we're teaching content. And so a eighth cause that you can look for is lack of programming or trained teachers. So gifted kids, and not all gifted kids need to be in gifted programming, but some really thrive in gifted programming because it meets their needs. It's kind of like at the other end of the spectrum of special needs kids, you would never deny kids service or never not try to meet their needs. And yet with gifted kids, a lot of districts either don't offer gifted programming or offer very little of it. So there might not be gifted programming at all. There may be not proper gifted programming. And what I mean by that is they may offer a program and yet they have a bigger need in another area. And then there's always the teachers who are not qualified to work with the gifted kids, or they're not good at working with those gifted kids. We all have strengths as teachers, and being able to work with gifted kids is a strength, just as being able to work with special ed kids is a strength, or being able to work with kids who are in the middle range is a skill. So teachers have their niche, and yet sometimes we put teachers in the wrong placement. The ninth cause that you should look for underachievement is the students are not challenged. A lot of times what happens is students finish their work early, and so the solution is simply to give them more work, to keep them busy. And so a lot of times we're seeking to keep kids compliant in the classroom rather than trying to teach them. And it's because we're trying to keep them compliant, we just give them work to keep them busy all the time. It's okay to finish early. And so another thing is we don't use a lot of higher order thinking in our classroom. So we use a lot of lower level thinking with our questions that we ask and our assignments that we have. And so kids are not being challenged in that way. And a lack of differentiation. We throw the word differentiation around quite a bit. The D word, I call it. But what the problem is that a lot of people really don't know what differentiation is, because differentiation is not just scaffolding it for kids to get to who are having trouble getting to the goal to reach that goal. It's also allowing scaffolding the other direction, where kids can go to take it to really high levels, or it's very open-ended so students can really explore that. The last cause would be kids who are too smart for their own good. Really highly gifted kids sometimes have trouble with perfectionism or obsessive compulsive disorder. It could be that they're abstract thinkers. They don't think in concrete. And a lot of school assessments are asking for concrete answers, but these students think in an abstract manner, and so it's hard for them to translate that into the concrete answer. And then kids who are so smart, like I said, you may have a kid who's getting straight A's in your classroom, but they are not reaching their potential. They're not being challenged. They're not living up to what they can do. And so they are an underachiever, whether they have A's or not. So a lot of what I talked about today comes from the following book, When Smart Kids Underachieve in School. But as a teacher, my advice is to look for these signs. So if a kid is not doing the work, or is not being compliant, or is misbehaving, look for other possibilities than the obvious ones. So maybe they're an underachiever, maybe they're bored, maybe they are not, intrinsically motivated. So you want to look for these signs with your kids, because the greatest line of defense for combating underachievement is you, the teacher, and seeing this underachievement. And in our next Todd Talk, I'll be talking about what are strategies you can use for each of these causes of underachievement.